Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this short video, which will take you through some of the strategies for the reading section of Component 1 for your English Language GCSE. For this video, we will use the paper, which is Pat and Bruce, which some of you will have been using in class. If you haven't already, pause the video and have a read through of the questions and of the text. We would recommend that as you read the text, you rule off with a straight, clear line which section each question corresponds to, so that you're using the right information. There is a bit of italics at the beginning. Do read that, but remind yourself that you're not to quote from that. You can't use that to answer any of the questions. That's the bit in italics at the start. You have a decision to make about whether you read the whole text first and then answer the questions, or whether you read each section and then answer the question on it sort of methodically as you go through. That's up to you, depending on how quickly you read. If you run out of time and you read more slowly than others, then you might want to do it section by section. But there is a disadvantage to that when you get to the end and you need to write the evaluation question where you should have known the whole text. For most students, it's all right to answer section by section. So if you haven't already, pause, read the questions, and then read the text. Okay, there are three skills that we'll be using throughout this, and let's be clear on that. There's AO1, which is finding information. Question 1, nice and simple, nice and concise. How carefully can you read? AO2 is the most important one. It needs to be your focus throughout. It's you commenting on the choices that writers make about everything, about the language, about the structure, about the phrases. Why have they chosen? Why have they made those choices? And your ability to explain and comment on that is where most of the marks are. And then lastly, there is a question where you do some evaluation, and we'll talk about that when we get to question 5. So, without further ado, question 1 reads like this. Read lines 1 to 13, and then list 5 reasons why Pat feels nervous in these lines. We would encourage you to make sure you're answering from the right section, not to use the italics, and then try and make 5 or perhaps 6 separate points. You can write bullet points. You can copy out quotations if you want, as long as they are short, a maximum of 3 or 4 words. Don't copy out whole sentences because it's not showing that you've understood it. But bullet points, single words or short phrases is absolutely fine. So the question, why does Pat feel nervous in these lines? You'll need to use that word nervous in your answer. Pat stood nervously at the door, reading the names underneath the buttons, until she saw the name she was looking for, Anderson. Nothing so far. That would be Bruce Anderson, the property surveyor, the person to whom she'd spoken on the telephone. Nothing so far. He was the one who collected the rent on the flat and paid the bills. Okay, maybe. Starting to kind of realise, she might feel a bit nervous about that, but not really. He was the one who had said that she could come and take a look at the place and see whether she wanted to live there. She wasn't really sure. And that might be the first bit of evidence that you take out. She really wasn't sure. That's why she feels nervous, because she doesn't know if she wants the place. So your answer would simply be, wasn't really sure if she wanted to live there. And we'll take a look at you now, he added, if you don't mind. So there, secondly, she says she'd be under inspection. Your second point might be that she feels nervous that she's being evaluated. So look, there's some of your answers. That's what your answers might look like. 5 of those would be 5 marks. And we would recommend that you spend about 5 minutes on a 5-mark question. And that's question 1. I'm not going to dwell on that any longer. Question 2, read lines 14 to 25. We'll have a look at them in a minute. Another 5-mark question. How does the writer show you Pat's feelings about the flat in these lines? You must refer to the text to support your answer using relevant subject terminology where appropriate. So we need 5 separate, distinct, different points about Pat's feelings. And you will need to be able to make clear points about emotions and feelings to do well on this exam. If you think the world is divided up into people who are happy and sad, you will be very limited in your answer to this. In all of your English classrooms, you've got a vocabulary wheel that's part of the display to help you really develop some vocabulary around what emotions and feelings characters are demonstrating. So you can see below there is a bit of a formula. You don't need to do much analysis, but you do need, wherever you see these italics, this here, and you must refer to the text, whenever you see that, you need to at least quote and sometimes explain. For example, the feature X suggests that the character is feeling Y. because, let's have a look at it. As she stepped onto the landing, the blue door opened and she found herself face to face with a tall young man, probably 3 or 4 years older than herself, and wearing a rugby jersey. So let's take that. Firstly, you might pick out that phrase or the adjectives tall and older, and you might make your first point. Firstly, Pat might be feeling nervous or, what should we say, intimidated because Bruce is taller than her and older than her. Put your quotation in there, and you've got that important word, because. And Bruce, he said, and I take it you're Pat. He smiled at her and gestured her to come into the flat. That was encouraging. So then you might take that and you might say, secondly, she then feels more relaxed because the word encouraging shows that she is being reassured. The answers are here in these bullet points. You can see you don't need much explanation. What you do need is clear points with an adjective about how she is feeling. She is not impressed. She feels a bit humiliated. She feels silly. With a quotation, and then on a couple of them, a brief explanation. She thinks, the writer states that was encouraging when she meets Bruce and he smiles and gestures to enter the flat, because this shows she's reassured and pleased. If you've got any questions about that, speak to your English teacher, because that's the fundamental skill. Just pulling together the evidence, the clear point, and a brief explanation. Once you can do that, and you can do it in a concise, clear way, you'll need to repeat it for questions 2, 3, and 4. Let's have a look at question 3 now. Read lines 26 to 47. What impressions do you get of Anna in these lines? How does the writer show you what she is like? You must refer to the text to support your answer using relevant subject terminology. And there's 10 marks here. So again here, you need to aim to make anything up to 10 different points. An impression is what you think or feel about them. So I get the impression that she was lazy. I get the impression that she was unreliable. I get the impression that she, whatever you think or feel about them. The formula is the same. The feature, and by that I mean the metaphor or the adjective or the word or the phrase, X, and by that I mean the quotation, gives the reader the impression that she is, I'll put an adjective in there, she is unreliable, because he had to ask her twice. Have a look at the text. Bruce then showed Pat the vacant room in the flat, and it brought home to him how messy and lazy Anna had been. He'd asked her to clean the room before she left. He had asked at least twice, and she had assured him twice that it would be done. So just taking those first couple of lines, I might say, the reader gets the impression that Anna is unreliable because the writer repeats the phrase, the word twice, which shows that she didn't just do it when she was asked. Simple as that, tick, that's the model for it. Your evidence, your clear point, reference what the feature is if you can. There I used repetition. Once you've given a brief explanation, move on. Because really the trick to this exam is making very clear, valid, evidenced points in quick succession. A good answer for this might have 8 or 9 sentences like the one I just gave you. You can see some of the answers. You might want to have a go at doing this yourself and then marking them. You can see each one is a slightly different impression. Not all negative, not all positive. Characters always have 2 sides to them. And the highest grades are given to those students who are able to evaluate and see both sides. We'll come to that explicitly on the last question. All right, so you can see where the adjectives are. She's selfish, she's not popular, she's spoilt. And then in brackets, you've got some of the explanation. You know, she's like a spoilt child because she is thoughtless and irresponsible. You would just need to find a quotation for that. Question 4 is similar, but with a slight difference. On lines 48 to 67, how does the writer show you what Pat and Bruce think about each other in these lines? 10 marks, so 10 points. You must refer to the text to support your answer using relevant subject terminology. So you'll need quotations and to identify features. On some of them, you'll need to expand briefly and explain the effect using the word because. What we need to be very careful here, though, is that when you get a question about 2 characters, treat them separately. Write separate points about Pat and separate points about Bruce. If you try and write about both characters at the same time, you'll get in a real muddle and you'll run out of things to say. They don't like each other. Here's my evidence. Okay, tick. But what you could do is say, Pat doesn't seem to like Bruce. Here's my evidence. Tick. Bruce doesn't seem to like Pat. And here's my evidence for that. Tick. And actually, you can double your marks up there. So aim for up to 10 separate ideas, and that should be 5 for each character. It was settled. Pat agreed to move in and would pay rent from the following Monday. The room was not cheap in spite of the musty smell and the general dinginess. Okay, well, there's nothing there about how they feel towards each other. You have got a job, haven't you? Bruce asked tentatively. The rent, ... So here we've got our first one. Initially, Bruce suspects that Pat might be unable to pay. She might be poor. She might be unreliable. You would just need to take your evidence and explain it. You have got a job, haven't you? This question shows that Bruce thinks that she is perhaps unreliable because he's worried about her not paying. Simple as that, tick, and move on. She assured him she would pay in advance, and he relaxed. There we go. He is then reassured by her. Your quotation, she assured him. Got a lot of points that you could make from this section. And all of these would be valid. And there's more than this. This is not the full list. If you think, if you're really struggling to see any impressions that they have of each other in the section, just check that you're looking at the right section, because the examiners want you to do well on this, and they will choose sections where there is plenty to say. Okay. If you are running out of things to say, then move on. Don't waste time looking and scouring over to find extra points. You're better off saying, do you know what? I'll move on to the next question and pick up my marks there. So the last question. Note this. To answer this question, you should read lines 68 to 81, but also consider the passage as a whole. So there will be evidence in that section, 68 to 81, but here you're going to write about the whole section. And then I give you a statement. In the final part of this passage, the writer encourages us to dislike Bruce. To what extent do you agree with this view? 10 marks. You should write about your thoughts and feelings about Bruce as he's presented here in the passage as a whole. It's the first bullet point. Second bullet point, you should write about how the writer has created these thoughts and feelings. You must refer to the text to support your answer. So you can see that italics means again that we need quotations, and we need some brief comments on the effect of language choices. In the box are a few strategies. You will do better if you agree with the statement. You will do better if you agree with it. That's where most of the evidence is. They're going to write something which is pretty obviously the most appropriate reading of a text. Use the keyword dislike over and over. It will get very repetitive. This is not a pretty exam. You are not crafting your answers. You are being efficient and clear. But if you are aiming for the highest grades, you should also give 1 or 2 points that also disagree with the statement. This is where the evaluation skill comes in. It is a really sophisticated ability to be able to see 2 sides of any argument, 2 sides of any point. And that's what we're testing here. So are you able to see how, yes, he is unlikable because he's quite sexist, he's quite judgmental, he objectifies her. Here's my evidence for these separate points. However, can you also see that there are points where he is quite warm and he gives the impression of being like a cousin, I think she says. So try and see 2 sides of the character. Characters always have at least 2 sides. You need to also be careful to balance your points from the section that you're given and the whole extract. If you just do all of one or all of the other, you will drop marks. So perhaps you would be worth a little attention. He was, after all, between girlfriends now that Laura had gone to London. This makes us dislike him. Worth a little attention. He's not treating her as a person, he is objectifying her. They'd agreed he would go to London every month, but it had not worked out. He'd been unable to find the time, but she'd been most unreasonable about it, he thought. Seems a little bit sexist, the way he's saying that she was unreasonable about it. He's a bit self-centered, unable to find the time to go and support his partner. It's not difficult to find the evidence for disliking him, but you need to explain it to a certain degree. And so that's that. This is section A of the reading section. As you can see, it's not difficult to be able to make the concise, valid, supported points that you need throughout. What is a real challenge is being able to do it in the time. So you need to develop a very concise style. You do need some analysis, but it's only brief. Use that word because, but you don't need to do it on every point. Hope that's been useful. If you've got any further questions, do speak to your English teacher or to myself, Mr. Want. And on your Google Drive, you've got lots of past papers. The real trick to this is practicing. So practice, and then for most of them we've shared mark schemes as well, so you can check how you did. Thanks very much.